Welcome back to Beyond the Mortgage. Thanks for tuning in again. Today I am happy to be here with our COO of People's Mortgage, Garrett Helminski.
Thanks for the invite.
Fellow Pollock, so we're off to a good start. He has left that dreary weather in Arizona to come out and see us in our wonderful winter wonderland here. So Garrett is in here today, so we want to take advantage of his knowledge and expertise to share some information with you guys. And today we're going to talk about appraisals. And more specifically, we get questions a lot about the different types of like appraisal waivers. What does it mean when a buyer gets an appraisal waiver? What does it mean when the buyer waives the appraisal? How does that affect the process? So Garrett, first of all, I had a question the other day, and I've had it a couple times from some realtor partners. They say, well, my client waived the appraisal, so we're good. I said, well, that's fine, but the appraisal still gets done, right?
Correct. So the appraisal, from the lender's point of view, the appraisal is really what shows the value of the collateral for the loan we're making. So in the contract, a borrower can waive the appraisal, of course, because what they're really saying is that we're willing to buy this house whether the appraisal supports the value of the purchase price or not. And from a lender, we would then require the borrower to make up the difference if the appraisal came in lower than the purchase price. So there's a lot of reasons why that makes sense. Depends on the market, depends on what the client's needs are. But just waiving the appraisal in the purchase contract means you're willing to buy the house regardless of what value the appraisal comes in at. But lenders still require the appraisal in almost every case to validate the value of the collateral for the loan we're making.
Sure. I mean, it makes sense. If I was giving a loan to somebody, I would want to make sure that they had the value to give back to me.
Exactly.
And I think it's important for clients and buyers to know that when they say that they're waiving the appraisal, what that means to them. Like you said, that if it comes in short, I mean, that's great for negotiation purposes, but you kind of have to make sure you have the assets to do that in case it does come in short.
Definitely. When you waive your appraisal, you're really agreeing to buy that house and make up the difference. So if you have a $400,000 purchase price, appraisal comes in at $380,000, then you're making up that $20,000 difference with your own money. It wouldn't be a part of the loan. So again, there's a lot of times when that makes sense. You want to work with a good buyer's agent. They can help steer you through that. But you should definitely know, as you mentioned, Matt, it's important to know you're committing to making up that difference.
Right. I think sometimes people don't realize that. They think, well, I waived the appraisal, so we're good. Not necessarily. Hopefully, but again, you could be on the hook.
You could. Sometimes when you waive the appraisal, you're also waiving your money goodbye.
So when we run it through every type of loan we do, we run it through what's called an automatic underwriting system.
Correct.
And, there's one for Fannie Mae, there's one for Freddie Mac, there's one for USDA, and so what happens is we get findings from that when we run that through, and especially with like Fannie and Freddie, it might say, okay, well, based on the value we have in the system and the loan amount you're talking about, so obviously the more down payment a person's putting down, the more likely they are to get that coveted appraisal waiver.
Yes. So on FHA and VA loans, you're always going to get a full standard appraisal. USDA as well. You mentioned that. For conventional loans, which are the majority of the loans in the country, about 60% of all loans are conventional loans. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, they back the conventional loans. There are 4 options that could come up on that automated underwriting. So they're looking at certain factors of the property. There is also kind of this super secret database of properties that Fannie and Freddie have. They're comparing the information on that automated underwriting system to that database, and they come up with one of 4 appraisal options. So the most common is a full standard appraisal. Appraiser goes and visits the property. Everyone's kind of familiar with that. Option 2 is what's called a desktop appraisal. So that is where an appraiser does all the research, does all the data, comes up with an appraised value, but they do not visit the property. So they're just looking at the MLS listing and then data on properties that have sold in the area. They come up, it comes up on the same form as a standard appraisal, but they don't actually ever visit the property. So those are two options. The third option is what we call an appraisal waiver. And so that means based on all the data in the file, the borrower's data, the data about the property that Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac already have, they accept the value of the transaction as is. So there is no appraisal done whatsoever. And then the fourth option is called an appraisal waiver with a property data report. So that means where Fannie and Freddie are accepting the value, but we're still sending an appraiser out to the property to measure the property, to count how many bedrooms there are, things like that. That property data report then gets uploaded back to Fannie and Freddie so they can keep their database up to date. It's very important though, especially for real estate agents, to understand if there is an appraisal waiver or an appraisal waiver with a property data report. Because an appraisal waiver, no one visits the property, you would just accept the value. The appraisal waiver with a property data report, although we're accepting the value, the appraiser is still going to validate the property. So any health and safety issues, any repair items, those could be called out. And so sometimes we think like there's some minor repairs or maybe missing stair railing, something like that. On a true value acceptance appraisal waiver, that would be fine. On an appraisal waiver with a property data report, that appraiser is going to call that out and that will need to be repaired. So even though the value was accepted, the property still had to be validated.
So it's almost loosely like a subject to
Similar,
appraisal,
correct,
like you get a new construction home.
Correct.
And the appraiser goes out there with the plans, inspects, and says, hey, listen, if everything's done as you say it's going to be done,
Correct.
Here's the value.
Correct.
And so that's kind of similar to that, where it's like, okay, listen, as long as what I'm seeing here is what I see when I get out there,
Yes.
we're going to be fine. But if I get out there and there's mold everywhere, or
Correct.
there's holes in the floors, we're not out of the woods.
We are not, correct. So those are the four options. The standard full appraisal everyone's kind of familiar with. The desktop appraisal, which is like a full appraisal, except for it's done on the appraiser's desktop. They don't physically go to the property. That's why it's called the desktop appraisal.
Makes sense.
Then there's the appraisal waiver value acceptance, and then the appraisal waiver value acceptance with the property data report. So one of those four options. If you do get a reduced option, the desktop option, or one of the two appraisal value acceptance, you do always have the option of going to a full appraisal.
Sure.
So that is always the case. So that again depends on the client, usually the buyer's agent working with a qualified loan officer to help them, navigate the waters on that. So, and again, all of those apply regardless of whether or not the borrower has waived the appraisal in the contract. So those things could make those determinations. Of course, if you get a value acceptance and the borrower has waived the appraisal in the contract, that's the best case scenario,
Right.
because then the value was accepted. There's no way to come in lower. On the full appraisal or the desktop appraisal, the appraisal could come in lower, and then the client would need to make up the difference in that scenario, or they would need to go back to the listing agent and renegotiate.
Yeah, I actually just had that happen on my most recent, actually closing today, where the buyer left a previous lender for various reasons, came over to me on a very short closing date, and when I ran it through, he said, well, I waived the appraisal, we're good. I'm like, well, we still got to check it out. Luckily, we did get the appraisal waiver through the system, like a full waiver, and it was
There you
like
go.
smooth, like you said, the perfect storm of happiness for everybody.
There you go.
So when you talk about the desk review, what are some reasons that would be the option that would be offered?
So what is going on with the desk reviews is Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac have a database of appraisals. So every lender in the country, big or small, they upload every appraisal in electronic format to the UCDP. It's called the Uniform Collateral Data Portal. There's so many.
That's impressive.
There are so many acronyms in the mortgage industry, almost as many as in the military, but they collect all this data so that they kind of understand the property market. And when they are looking at a property address, we run it through the automated underwriting system. It's comparing that address to what it knows about that property in the database. And if it knows enough information and the loan fits certain parameters, then Fannie and Freddie say, we don't need an appraiser to visit this because we already know enough. And it doesn't mean there was an appraisal on that property. That property could have been a comp in other appraisals. So when the appraisals get uploaded to the database, it has all of the data, not only on the subject of the appraisal, but all of the comps used in the appraisal. So basically, to get any of the reduced options, desktop, value acceptance, or value acceptance with PDR, the automated underwriting is looking at the characteristics of the loan, how much money the borrower is putting down, is this a primary residence, is it a second home, etc., and then comparing that to all of the information in the super secret database.
And that makes sense, because I've had files in the past, I mean, if you do this long enough, where I've had 75% loan to value not get the appraisal waiver, but then an 80% value be fine.
And so what that means is that the database did not have enough information about that particular property to make a determination.
That makes sense.
And then there are certain types of properties that are never allowed, manufactured homes, multifamily. You will never get a reduced option on those, or at least currently. They could always change the guidelines, but
I don't really remember seeing them ever really on cash out refinances.
It is possible, but it's very rare.
Right. Okay. Well, there you go, everybody. Thanks again for stopping by Beyond the Mortgage. Thank you for Garrett for taking the time to come out and visit us.
Thank you.
I hope this is helpful for you guys. Be sure to click that subscribe button when you come visit us, and tune in next time for Beyond the Mortgage. Have a great day.